Chapter 10. And does everyone have a lesson this morning? If you don't have a lesson, just put your hand up. Brother, okay, we need a couple down front here. Brother Kurt, if you'd help us, thank you. Brother David, he's very well dressed this morning, I have to say. I love that grey jacket and black trousers, very nice. I think we'll do a duet later, right? Oh, you need a tie, you do need a tie. But your tie doesn't match at all. We'll have to sort you out on that. All right. Well, we're going through the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah's 13 chapters, so we're getting close to the end of our back of the book study, which has been looking at Ezra and Nehemiah. This is when the children of Israel, the Jewish people, came back from Babylon, back into the land, back to Jerusalem. And Ezra came back and rebuilt the temple, and Nehemiah came back and rebuilt the walls, and Ezra came back and rebuilt the people. And that's really where we are right now. The wall is built, but a wall is just a wall. You know, we're trying to build a building. A building is just a building. It's not really about buildings. It's not really about walls. It's about people. And the Jewish people needed revival. And what we find in Nehemiah chapter 8 is the revival came. And it didn't come through the leaders. It was the people themselves that called Ezra to open the scriptures to them. And you remember, as they began listening to the word of God, they looked at their lives and they saw what God said about what they were supposed to do. And there's a big gap between them. And they weren't doing what they were supposed to do, primarily because they didn't know. And so now that they've reconnected with the scriptures, they were really concerned, and they wept and they mourned about their sin. But this beginnings of this stirring, this religious revival, the flames were fanned because the leaders did come in and they encouraged the people. And in chapter 9, last time we saw that they went through the whole history of Israel as a context for something that they were going to do in chapter 10. In chapter 10, they're going to write their names down upon a covenant, which is a promise or an oath to God. They're absolutely fed up with sin. They're fed up with being chastened by God. They're fed up being the tail and not the head. And they want to get thoroughly right with God. And so they're going to make a public commitment in chapter 10, which is very, very serious. Many of them would put their names to this covenant. And you know, I think there's an important lesson here. A lot of times, we can experience revival in our lives, but then sometimes it kind of peters out, and sometimes it peters out quite quickly. And one of the things that they were trying to do was to nail things down where it wouldn't be a flash in the pan. They wouldn't backslide. They wouldn't digress. But they would stick to this time of spiritual revival, that it would last in their lives, that it would change their lives. And so they make a public decision, a public commitment to the Lord. Now, many times in a service, at the end of the service, we have the invitation. And we're inviting people to come. Maybe some people got questions, they need help spiritually. There's a little room back in here. And usually if we have a lady come back and she needs counselling, sometimes we just meet at the front here, but if they need counselling, we'll take a lady, send her in this little room where they can talk privately. Same thing with men, so on. But many times we miss an opportunity. Maybe there's a decision that we're making in our hearts, but we don't make it known publicly. Now, it's not that you have to go into a lot of detail, but sometimes it's really, really important to make public decisions. There's been times in my life, and it doesn't happen every Sunday, but there's times in my life when I came forward in a service and I said to the pastor, I have made this decision. And it helped me. It helped me to remember that time. It helped other people to understand what was going on in my life, that they would encourage and help me, because I wanted not to go back on those things. I wanted it to be something that would be life-changing. And that's what we read here when we get into Nehemiah chapter number 10. So it's 39 verses. The first 27 of those verses are just really describing the people who are going to sign this covenant. Now, if you look at the last verse of chapter 9, it says in verse 38, and because of all this, we make a sure covenant, a promise, and write it, and our princes, Levites, and priests seal onto it. So they wrote what the covenant was. Here's the promise we're making to God. This is the oath that we're making to God. They wrote it down. Then underneath that, there was representatives that came, the priests, the Levites, and the rulers who came, and they put their names to it. Now that helped them to realize their name was on it. They would always remember what was on it. If there was any dispute what was in the promise, hey, talk to him and him and him and him, because they signed it. So there's no dispute about what the promise was. And so this was something that, they were putting their names on it. So let's read in chapter 10, verse 1. And we'll read the first 27 verses first of all. Now those that sealed were Nehemiah. Of course, Nehemiah is the leader. He's really the governor. And so he's the first one on the list. And it's important, I think, that leaders put their money where their mouth is. If they're true leaders, then they should be making the same commitments. Preachers shouldn't be asking their people to do something that they're not willing to do themselves. So Nehemiah, the Tirshatha, which is the governor. In Irish and Gaelic, the name for the prime minister is the Taoiseach. That's interesting. It's kind of close to that. Tirshatha. The son of, this is where I'm going to get slaughtered here, all these names. Hakaliah and Zadkijah. Sariah, Azariah, Jeremiah, Pushur, Amariah, Milkijah, Hattush, Shebaniah, Malach, Haram, Meremoth, Obadiah, Daniel. By the way, it's kind of like, my name's Thomas, my daddy's name's Thomas, and just because you read, is that Daniel of the book of Daniel? No, because this is way after Daniel of the book of Daniel, but they share names, right? There's more than one Daniel in the Bible, more than one Joseph, and so on. Verse 7, Meshullam, Abijah, Mijamin, Maziah, Bilgai, Shemaiah. These were the priests. Okay, so there's going to be 84 names altogether, but he starts with the priests. Okay, they were the representatives of men before the Lord. And then in verse 9, he talks about the second group, which were the Levites, which is the Levitical priesthood, the tribe of the priests, the Levites. And by the way, the priests were taken out of the Levites, but not every Levite was a priest at a particular. The priests had, they were called up, as it were, and they had courses that they went through. So you may have been a Levite, but not a priest, but then you'd be called up to be a priest, so you'd have been a priest and a Levite. So verse number 9, and the Levites, both Joshua, the son of Azaniah, Benui, of the sons of Henadad, Kadmiel, and their brethren, Shebaniah, Odijah, Kelita, Peliah, Hanan, Micah, Rehob, Hashabiah, Zakur, Sherebiah, Shebaniah, Hodijah, Bani, and then, so that's the Levites. Then in verse 14, you have the chief of the people. So these were the rulers. And you had rulers of families. And this all actually goes all the way back to Moses' time, when they had 70 elders who helped Moses to rule. And that ended up being what we called the Sanhedrin, which were the rulers, the leaders in the land and in Jerusalem. So they were there. And they obviously were, not all the people signed this document, but these were the representatives that signed it. They represented the people. Now everybody made the covenant. It was a verbal covenant. And they agreed to it. They claved to these leaders, but these were the guys who put their names down. Verse 14, the chief of the people, Parosh, Pahath Moab, Elam, Zatu, Bani, Bunai, Zagan, Bebiah, Adonijah, Bigvaiah, Adin, Ater, Zakijah, Asher, Hodijah, Hasham, Beziah, Harif, Anathoth. I should have somebody else read these, shouldn't I? Nebiah, Payash, Mashalom, Hezer, Mashelebil, Zadok, Zadu, Pelitha, Hanan, Anaiah, Hosea, Hananiah, Hashab, Halosh, Peliha, Shobak, Rehum, Habana, Hashabna, Mashiach, Anijah, Hannah, Anan, Maluk, Harim, and Baina. I'm glad I got through all of that. Then so anyway, that's the leaders, and these were those who were making these public decisions and making those public decisions known. So they were standing up for this decision and this commitment that these people are making unto the Lord. They were putting their money where their mouth was, in a sense, and putting their name to this. So these were the people of the covenant. Now the provisions of the covenant, verse 28 through verse 39. Let's just read through a few verses here. Read from verse 28 to verse 31. This is the terms of the covenant. And the rest of the people, the priests and the Levites, the porters, the singers, and the Nethinims, and all they that had separated themselves from the people of the lands unto the law of God, their wives, their sons, and their daughters, everyone having knowledge and having understanding. So he's speaking now simply about just the rest of the people. And this was even, not just men, but also women. Not only the adults, but also the children, at least to the age of understanding. We saw that when they were reading the scriptures, that everyone who was old enough to understand the scriptures. And that's really important with God. He doesn't want us to make decisions about stuff we don't understand. He wants us to make willing decisions about the things that we are cognizant, we understand what's going on, and we're making a decision based on that knowledge. So everyone having knowledge and having understanding. Well, what did they do? Verse 29, they clave to their brethren, their nobles. Now, this is the guys that just made this public decision. And what they're saying is, there's not enough room on the piece of paper for everybody's name, but he's our leader. Maybe it's a father of a clan or an elder of a particular city or whatever. And so that particular person who put their name on that, they clave to that leader, to that ruler. And they were as much as the leaders entering into this covenant. In fact, in verse 29 it says, and entered into a curse and into an oath. And so what they're actually saying is, Lord, if we don't keep our end of this promise, then curse us, bring judgment upon us. This was absolutely serious in the hearts and minds of these people. And of course, again, the context of chapter 9, where they have been, and every time they did wrong, God chastened them. God was merciful. He was long-suffering. He was kind. But when they did wrong, there was judgment there. When they got right, then they enjoyed the blessings of God. And as they look over their history, they just said, look, we're tired of this. We're tired of making wrong decisions. We're tired of being in sin. We're tired of judgment. We want to do what's right. And so it was as serious as a heart attack for these folks. They were really, really as serious and as intent and as sincere as you could possibly be. And so it says, they entered into a curse and into an oath to walk in the law of God. So this was not just a flash in the pan. This was not just a decision. This was going to be something that was ongoing. Sometimes we can make decisions and then it doesn't affect our lives. This was a decision that they wanted to make, that they had already made, that they wanted to endure. This was a process. This was something that would take time, really the rest of their lives, to walk in God's law, which was given by Moses, the servant of God, and to observe and do all the commandments of the Lord our God, of the Lord our Lord. You notice there's two different words. Capital Word is Jehovah. The commandments of Jehovah, who is our Adonijah, our Adonai. Jehovah is our Lord, our Master, and his judgments and his statutes. And that we would not give our daughters unto the people of the land, nor take their daughters for our sons. And if the people of the land bring ware or any victuals on the Sabbath day to sell, that we would not buy it of them on the Sabbath or on the holy day, and that we would leave the seventh year and the exaction of every debt. Also we made ordinances for us to charge ourselves yearly with the third part of the shekel for the service of the house of God. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But we see, first of all, if you look at your outline there, the terms of the covenant was they wanted to keep the law. Now, in verse 2 of chapter 9, it said that they had separated. If you go back to chapter 9, this is before the Levite goes up to read all of the history and the context of this decision that they're making. And as they prepared their heart for this decision, they had separated themselves from the strangers. Look at 9 verse 2. And the seed of Israel separated themselves from all strangers and stood and confessed their sins and their iniquities, the iniquities of their fathers. And so, part of the problem was that they had actually intermarried with heathen people. And this goes back to, and they're going to touch on this in just a moment, but it goes back to the days of Solomon. And God warned them. He says, do not marry people who are not Jews, because what would happen? Well, the other people had their own gods. And when they intermarried, then the hearts of the people would go after these false gods. And that's exactly what happened with Solomon. Solomon was the wisest man ever lived, besides the Lord Jesus. He wrote Proverbs, he wrote Ecclesiastes, he wrote Song of Solomon. He wrote 3 books in the Bible. And when you look at his early life and the judgments that he made, it was astute, it was cunning, it was very, very wise, and it was very godly. But what did he do? He opened his heart up to something that God had forbade the kings, and that was to marry many wives. And so he had 700 wives, 300 concubines, and and many of them were like political marriages, right, from these different nations. The problem was these different other nations had different gods. And so the Bible will tell you that Solomon's heart went after these other gods. So he made idols for his wives, like to the false god Shemos and even Moloch and all these different other false gods. And here was a very wise man, very powerful man, and yet his heart was drawn away because of the influence that he allowed into his life, And what they're actually doing is reversing that. They're saying we're coming away from the heathens. We're separating ourselves from what's in the world. But it's not just separation from. It is separation from, but it's also separation to. So we're saying no to the influence of heathenism and falsehood and false gods, and we're saying yes to the Word of God. And so they're allowing their hearts to be influenced by the Word of God and preventing influence from the world, as it were. Now, there's a lot in that for you and me, because everybody's going to be programmed. Your brain's going to be full of something. I said the other week that when I got saved, my uncle said to me, he says, you've been brainwashed. I says, I'm glad, because my brain needed to be washed. But really, that's what it is. It's a reprogramming. In fact, later on, we're going to look at, we're preaching this morning from Romans chapter 1. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice. That's giving yourself to God, to be influenced by Him. And it says, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. So He doesn't want us to be conformed to the world. He doesn't want us to be like the world. Why? Because the world's not good. Yeah. The things that are in the world do not please God. And God has separated a people peculiar for Himself that would please Him. And so we've got to say no to the influence from the world and yes to the influence from God. And that's what they were doing. And this was the decision that they were making. So they were going to keep the law, separated unto the law of God. And then they're going to keep His commandments, to observe and to do all the commandments. This was a commitment to walk in God's law. Not just a decision, but a process. And we have Romans 12, 1 and 2 down there. And then to keep from intermarriage. And this is really where the rubber hits the road, isn't it? It's one thing to say, well, no, I'm not going to let the world affect me. I'm not going to let the heathen nations kind of affect our culture and the way we think of things. But it's when, your son sees a heathen girl, a pretty little heathen girl, and he wants her to be his wife. And of course, they had arranged marriages, so the parents would get together. But the parents are now saying, no, that's not going to happen. Even the Orthodox Jewish people today. I mean, if a Jewish man wants to marry a Gentile bride, of course it happens. But most of the Jews are secular today. But within an Orthodox families, it would be unheard of. They must marry a Jew, right? But that's also true for us too, because in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 it says, "Be not unequally yoked with unbelievers." As a matter, and it's something that will drag you down. Notice the verse there in 1 Corinthians 5:15-13. Be not deceived, evil communications corrupt good manners. When you get married, you want to have somebody that you're compatible with. That obviously we're all different. I mean, you're not going to marry somebody who is identically like you. There are going to be things that are different. But on those things of core beliefs, so there's all those romance, but what's going to happen when you get married? I mean, are you going to go to church? Is he going to go to church with the wife? Is the wife going to go to church with the husband? If you're even from two different denominations or two different ways of thinking things, you got to think through that, because where do the kids go to church? And then there's a fight, you see. And it's a great thing when everybody's in agreement and you believe the same things about the Lord, because that reduces a lot of tensions, but also reduces the influence from falsehood coming in. So a Christian woman should not marry an unsaved man. And that means you should never date an unsaved man. And a Christian man should not date an unsaved girl. That's just Bible, okay? You're opening yourself up for trouble if you do that. And of course, they'd already done it, but now they're trying to reverse things. They're trying to be right with God. And so they're making this promise. Look down at verse number 31 again. And if the people of the land verse 30, and that we would not give our daughters unto the people of the land, nor take their daughters for our sons. That's what that's talking about. Okay, so there's a separation there. And then verse 31, keep the Sabbath. And if the people of the land bring in other words, goods or food, victuals on the Sabbath day to sell, that we would not buy it of them on the Sabbath or on the holy day, and that we would leave the seventh year and the exaction of every debt. Okay, one of the things that got them in trouble, why Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, was able to come in and they didn't enjoy the protection of God. He was able to take them away captive. It was a judgment of God upon them. Really, there was two things, and the two things are in verse 30 and 31. They intermarried and they brought heathenism to Israel, Judah, and Jerusalem, and even right into the temple courts. You read the book of Ezekiel, and in the temple of God, built by Solomon, they had all these false idols and false gods in the temple. God brought judgment upon them because they'd opened themselves up to heathenism. But the second thing was that they did not obey the Word of God. The Word of God gives Israel, by the way, the Sabbath, the teaching on Sabbath is for Israel. It was given to them in Exodus chapter 20 on Mount Sinai when God himself came down. It was actually chapter 19. And God spoke to the children of Israel. And he's the one, by the actually words, they actually heard with their ears the voice of God on Mount Sinai. They were in the valley. God came down and spoke to them. And he gave them the 10 Commandments and he instructed them concerning the Sabbath. But even before that, when they were collecting the manna, it was the first time it was ever explained to them that on the seventh day you don't collect manna. You collect double on the sixth day, which is Friday. And Sabbath is not Sunday. Sabbath is Saturday. It's the seventh day of the week. Today is not the seventh day. Today is the first day, because Jesus was resurrected on the first day. He revealed himself to the disciples on the first day. The day of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit came, was on the first day of the week. So that's another thing altogether. But Sabbath was given to Israel. It was assigned to Israel. But what did they do? They broke it. Now, there wasn't just one. There was a Sabbath for the week, so they were to rest on the Sabbath. And so they weren't to buy and sell on the Sabbath. And what was going on here? The gates were open in Jerusalem. Here come the heathen coming in with their little carts. And the bazaar was on. And here we are on the Sabbath, the Saturday bazaar. And they're selling, and the Jews are coming and buying stuff left, right, and centre. And what they're deciding right now is, we're not doing that no more. In fact, they're not coming in. The gates are going to be locked. Nehemiah saw to that. And but they said, we're not going to buy their stuff. We're not going to buy their food. We're going to go according to the law of God as given to us in the book of Moses, in the Pentateuch. And so they were not going to violate the Sabbath. Not only was there a weekly Sabbath, but there was also a yearly Sabbath. And this is what they got themselves. Look over at 2 Chronicles chapter 36. This is what got them in trouble. This is why they were banished to Babylon for 70 years. Why was it 70 years? Well, he tells you here in 2 Chronicles 36. You see, not only were the people to rest, but the land was to rest. By the way, those principles are still true today. You know, God made the world and everything in it in 6 literal days. And he rested on the seventh day. What, was God tired? No. The Bible simply says that he ceased from his work, and he set that up as a pattern really for all mankind. Now, the sign is to Israel, is binding upon Israel, but the pattern and the principle of Sabbath, where you have to rest every week, is something that's important. And some of you might be working 7 days a week. I'm going to tell you, you shouldn't do it. You should at least have one day where you just rest. And now, Sunday's one of my busiest days, so now I do say that on Sunday afternoon, I mean, it's nap time. I mean, I rest on the Lord's Day. But my rest day is usually Monday. You see, Monday is my day off. Okay. Does that stop people calling me up? And as we didn't know, they still do it. But it's my day off. Make a note. All right. But not only were the people to rest, the land was to rest. If you work your land every year, year after year after year, there's something about, and farmers even know this, agricultural people know this today, at some point you have to let your land go fallow, that you don't grow anything on it. The land itself has to rest. Did they observe that? No. And for 490 years, they didn't observe it. Now that's 7 times 70 is 480 years. And so they forgot about it. They're just working the land every year for 480 years, and God was counting. They missed that Sabbath. After another 7 years, they missed another Sabbath. After another 7 years, and God's counting. And so it's kind of like, pay me now or pay me later. So they said, well, we're not paying you now. And the Lord says, well, I will get it. And so you know what happened? Look at verse 21. 2 Chronicles 36, verse 21. To fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah. See, Jeremiah said it was going to be 70 years of captivity. Until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths. For as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath to fulfill 60, scores 20, so 3 scores 60. And 10 years equals 70, to fulfill 70 years. So the land did lie fallow for 70 years, all at one time. See, people are stupid. We think we can get away with stuff, and we can't. God's always watching. God's taking notes. God's counting. So that's what got them in trouble in the first place. So now they're saying, we're not doing that anymore. And did you know that Israel, even today, this is an amazing thing. When I did the study on the Battle of Gog and Magog and Israel in the latter times, it's a tremendous study, to study the history of Israel from back in the late 1800s. They didn't become a nation until May 1948. But there's a lot of things going on before that. They started planting trees in 1901. There's millions of trees. Do you know, in the 1800s, there were no trees. There were no trees. There were no forests in Israel whatsoever. Yet Ezekiel 38 talks about forests being there. Now, there's forests there today. In fact, the Palestinians regularly set them on fire. Let me tell you, don't start me. The Palestinians hate Israel. If you go to Israel, you'll find you go into the Israeli areas, everything is pristine, it's neat, it's clean, it's modern. You go into the Palestinian areas, it's like a dump. There's trash everywhere, rubbish, writing on the walls, buildings falling down. They have no pride in it's not what we're for, it's what we're against. They're against Israel. And so, the interesting thing about when you study the history of modern Israel is the things that they do right now that they're trying to keep. For example, they keep the yearly Sabbath. Now, they plant trees all over the place, but they do not plant anything in the ground on that 7th year, on that sabbatical year. Now, do they plant stuff? This is where they get around it. They have these conveyor belts things that they have above the ground, and it's what do you call that? Where they grow stuff in like this gel, this water. It's hydro. What do you call it? Whatever that was, yes. And so what they do, they put the seeds in there and they grow it for that year on these mats that are above the ground. And then when it goes into the first year after the Sabbath, they take that stuff and they plant it in the ground and they grow it. I mean, they've actually devised a way to grow trees in the desert. I've told you about this before. Because the desert, it gets like a skin on it. It's a very impervious skin. It's like about 2 inches thick of just like minerals and salts and sand and stuff. And so when the rainwater hits it, just runs off it like water off a duck. But what happens is it runs down these hills, and what they do is they dig somewhere from the top, they come down and they dig a hole, right? And then they plant a tree in that little depression. So what happens is the water hits the impervious stuff up here, it runs down into this trough, into this little bowl, and the water's nowhere to go, so it just sinks down, and this tree's in the middle of that thing, and they plant hundreds of thousands of them, millions of them, in the desert. I mean, there's nothing but sand. And so you go into the desert, and these trees are growing in the middle of nowhere because there's enough water collected to keep that little tree alive. It's an amazing thing. But they will not do it you ought to Google it, they will not do it on the Sabbath. So they're actually still trying to do this today because it's in the scriptures, in the law of God. So they said, we're going to keep the Sabbath. Then the last part is basically from verse 32 to verse 39 is really all about the house of God. And I do want to make a point toward the end. Let me see if I can go through this quite quickly. Look at verse, we'll just read through it and comment as we go. Also, verse 32, we made ordinance for us to charge ourselves yearly with the third part of a shekel for the service of the house of God. This is what we call the temple tax. You remember the guy comes to Peter and he says, is your master paying the temple tax tribute? And Peter says, yeah, sure, of course, because that was the right thing to do. It's in the law of God. Then Jesus comes to Peter and he says, let me ask you something, Peter. He says, do kings take taxes from their own children? And of course, the answer is no. In other words, the temple is actually belongs to Jesus. He says, you've made mine house a den of thieves. It belonged to Christ. So would it be right for Christ to tax himself? Would it be right for the Father to tax the Son? And the answer, of course, would be no. He's exempt from that. And that's why Jesus pulled Peter up on that point. But he says, but we don't want them to be offended. So here's what you want to do, Peter. Go down to the lake. Bring yourself a fishing rod. See, a lot of times when they're fishing, it was nets. I love this bit because they had a fishing rod, an angle. Okay? And he threw the hook in. He says, the first fish you catch, you bring it in, and guess what? There will be a silver coin in its mouth. And it's just enough for pay the temple tax for me and you, so you'd go take it and give it to your man. And so, right enough, Peter went down, caught a fish, he brought it in. He got it up there, he looked in its mouth. What was it? A silver coin. And he paid the temple tax. It's amazing, isn't it? Of course, fish will bite anything that's shiny. You know, we used to catch mackerel in Belfast Loch by just throwing a silver hook in. Put a big string of silver hooks in, and the sunshine hits that, and the mackerel come in, they'll just bite anything that's silver at all. Anyway, little fishing lesson there. Verse 33, for the showbread, and for the continual meat offering, and for the continual burnt offering, for the Sabbaths of the new moons, for the set feasts, and for the holy things, for the sin offering, to make an atonement for Israel, and for all the work of the house of God. Now here's what they're saying. We're going to take care of the house of God. We're going to pay money so that the daily events in the temple are taken care of. It takes money to run a temple. It takes money to turn the lights on the church. So we're going to take care of the house of God. And for example, the showbread had to be baked in a very special way by the Levites with special ingredients every week, and they changed out the showbread every week. Well, it takes money to put that stuff together. He said, we're going to take care of that. Then in verse 34, and we cast the lots among the priests and the Levites and the people for the wood offering. Do they offer wood? Well, they're burning all these sacrifices. What are you going to burn a sacrifice? You got to have wood to burn a sacrificial sacrifice, right? So it takes effort to bring wood in. I don't know if you ever cut wood, but it's hard work, right? And they're burning a lot of sacrifices every day. So where does all the wood come from to burn the sacrifices? Well, who wants to go do that? Well, it's an odious task, but somebody had to do it. So what did they do? Well, we cast lots among the priests, the Levites, and the people for the wood offering. So they basically drew straws to see who was going to get to do it. They probably didn't want to do it, but if they drew the straw, then it was their turn to go ahead. What were they saying? We're going to look after the house of God. Whatever is needed in order to obey the Lord and the sacrificial system, we're going to make sure that it's done. We're going to make sure that the needs are met. For the wood offering, to bring it into the house of God after the houses of our fathers, at times appointed year by year, to burn upon the altar of the Lord. This is verse 34, our God, as it is written in the law. Then verse 35, and to bring the first fruits of our ground, and the first fruits of all fruit of all trees, year by year, unto the house of the Lord. So they would bring the offering of the first fruits. When they did that, and of course there is the Feast of First Fruits, which is the first fruits of the barley harvest in the spring of the year. And then Pentecost was actually the first fruits of the wheat harvest. And then when you get into this time, right now we're in Sukkot, which is the Feast of Tabernacles right now. That's what Israel's celebrating. It's the last of the feast. That's the end of all harvest. The nut harvest, the fruit harvest is all brought in. And so they would take the first fruits of all of their harvests and they would give it to the Lord. You know what that meant? It meant that in their minds, they were thinking, Lord, you deserve this because you gave us all of the harvest. All of the harvest belongs to you. And we're acknowledging that by giving you the first fruits. So it's part of their worship. All that we have belongs to God. And we give it give God an offering as a token of that. Also in verse 36, their firstborn, also the firstborn of our sons and of our cattle, as it is written in the law, and the firstlings of our herds and of our flocks, to bring to the house of our God unto the priests that minister in the house of our God. Now this goes back to the Exodus, because in the Exodus all the firstborn died, right, in Egypt, except if you had the blood. When I see the blood, the two side posts and the lintel, it's the sign of the cross. They didn't know that, but God the Father was looking at that. When I see the blood of the Lamb, I will pass over you. And so Israel got to go scot-free, but what the Lord was saying was, the firstborn belongs to me. And so they could dedicate the firstborn. They had to offer sacrifice. Remember when Jesus was the firstborn, Mary and Joseph had to go to Jerusalem and offer 2 turtle doves as a sacrifice for Jesus, in order, in a sense, buy Jesus back. The same thing was true, for example, of a donkey. They could bring a donkey to the temple, but they could buy it back. And if they didn't buy it back, then its neck would be broken. So the firstborn belonged to the Lord. And again, it's worship. It's giving God his proper place. It's worthyship. It's honoring God. And so the firstborn, as well as the first fruits, belonged to the Lord. Verse 37, that we should bring the first fruits of our dough and our offering, and the fruit of all manner of trees, and wine and oil, unto the priests, to the chambers of the house of our God. Then it talks about tithing, verse 37, and the tithes of our ground unto the Levites, that the same Levites might have the tithes in all the cities of our tillage. See, the Levites, they were the special tribe that belonged to the Lord. God was their inheritance, and God would look after them. So all the other tribes, the other 11 tribes, they were to take the tithe, which is 1/10 of all of their harvest, their barley, their wheat, and they would bring 1/10 of their harvest, and they would bring it to the Levites. Because what are the Levites going to eat? They don't have any land to grow stuff. So the Levites ate of the tithe of all the other people. But then the Levites themselves were to the tithe. So they would take at 1/10 of what they had, and they would bring it to the house of God. Talks about that. Verse 37, 38. Verse 37, the tithes of our ground unto the Levites, that the same Levites might have the tithes in all the city of our tillage. And the priests, the son of Aaron, shall be with the Levites when the Levites, now watch this, take tithes. Hebrews 7 talks about this. God doesn't take tithes anymore. See, when they took tithes, it was mandatory. You didn't really have a say in it. They took tithes. We don't take tithes anymore. It's a free will thing. By the way, it's always been like that. It's ultimately people should be doing it from their heart. That's why Abraham gave. That's why Jacob gave unto the Lord. It was a free will thing. But the Levites were under the law, and they were to take the tithes. Verse 38. And the Levites shall bring up the tithe of the tithes. Notice that. The Levites shall bring up the tithe of the tithes. So, by the way, and we're running out of time here, but 1 Corinthians 9 takes that same pattern and applies it to the New Testament church. That's why we believe in tithing. Okay, the tithes of God's people takes care of what we do here. It takes care of the preacher. The Bible says, even so has the Lord ordained that they that preach the gospel should live off the gospel. Well, what does that mean about the preacher? Does the preacher tithe then? Yeah. See, it's your tithes that support me, but then I tithe of what I get. So basically we all tithe, all right? But that's the way the Lord has set it up. And then look down at verse number 39. For the children of Israel and the children of Levi shall offer the offering of corn, of new wine, of oil unto the chambers where are the vessels of the sanctuary, and the priests that minister, and the porters and the singers. And we will not forsake the house of our God. That was part of their revival. Now, I've run out of time, but I want you to look at the note at the very bottom of your notes there, would you? Much of this covenant centered on the worship of the house of God. We will not forget the house of our God. Now watch this. A strong nation needs a strong religious life. Now, what do you think about that for a minute? When Israel was strong religiously, she was strong as a people and as a nation. When she was weak religiously, then that's when she had problems. That's when enemies came in. That's when her whole social fabric fell about there. And I want you to just notice that quote by John Adams. Because if our nation wants to be strong, then people who are absolutely decimating anything that looks religious at all, trying to get religion out of American life, let me tell you something, that's the death knell. And you don't have to believe me, and you don't even have to believe the Bible, just look at history. Just look at history and see what happens to nations that go secular, do their own thing, and turn their back on God and on a religious centre, and you'll find out that those nations went down the tubes. But John Adams said our constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. See, that's why we have problems with people with machine guns up and shooting innocent people. A person who had a fear of God would never do such a thing. I mean, this guy had no concept of a fear of God, because he shoots 58 people and then he kills himself. Well, when he kills himself, he's going to meet God after having done that. That means to me that he has no fear of God, no respect for God, and that kind of person is able to do that sort of thing. And the more we become irreligious, our morality going down the tubes, no fear of God before their eyes, then we'll see more and more of that. But when we had a religiously strong centre at the base in our social fabric, you never saw anything like that. Or it was very, 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 very rare to see something like that. And so I think John Adams was right. It's really, America's great because America is good. When America ceases to be good, it will cease to be great. And that's just the bottom line on it. And what you find out here, it's reflected here in the history of the Jewish people. Lord, thank you for your word. We're grateful for this wonderful revival and testimony and this covenant that the people of God made. Lord, help us to realize that sometimes we need to make decisions that are really serious, and sometimes those decisions need to be public. And help us, Lord, to honor those decisions, and Lord, not just to decide, but to walk in the law of our God. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.